What's the most supernatural experience you've ever had? Story 1. January 1st, 2003. A stretch of road between two coastal towns in Australia. It was a dark and stormy night. No, really. It was driving along with my partner. I noticed a car coming up behind us, traveling fast. It was a single-lane road, so we couldn't move over. I said to my partner, "This guy is in a hurry. Let him overtake you." My partner agreed, and he moved left as soon as there was an overtaking lane. The car pulled up beside us and then disappeared. There was nowhere it could have gone. We sat in silence for a few minutes, and I said, "Did you see that?" He said, "Yep." Story 2. When I was around 17, I got out of bed to go get my dog out of his kennel and feed him. As I passed one of the cabinets, a voice whispered in my ear, "Wake up." I could feel the breath and everything and literally just froze for a few seconds and ran upstairs telling myself what the fudge repeatedly. It has messed with me to this day. I'd rather have heard absolutely anything else because wake up just messes with you. Story 3. My remote once jumped off the TV by itself, the old-school box type of television, when I was watching with my girlfriend. Didn't fall or slide off. We actually saw it take a leap as if somebody threw it. We both just sat there being really confused before even questioning it out loud. Answer. Edit. Sorry. I went to bed after writing this and just woke up to like 60 messages asking to see the video. I actually have two. One was a few weeks after the other. I've uploaded them to Imgur here. Please excuse my stupid commentary on the videos as I really only filmed them to show my parents. Also, since taking the first video, I have never plugged the lights in again. So if there's some hidden battery part of the lights, then I don't know how it managed to recharge itself. These kind of stories are always the creepiest for me. The ones where you have someone else there. To verify it really happened and it wasn't your imagination. Not quite the same as your story, but I have a bunch of fairy lights set up in my room. Most of them are powered by USB and plug either into a spare plug or directly into the USB socket of my extension lead. I have one set of fairy lights that keep lighting up by themselves. Initially, it happened while they were plugged into the extension lead, but the lead was switched off, so it shouldn't have been possible. I didn't think much of it. But the second time it happened, I just took the USB lead out and left them totally unplugged. Since then, they have continued to randomly turn themselves on, and not just a brief flicker either. They are properly turned on and stay on. I've managed to capture it on video and show everyone they're unplugged too. My dad's an electrician and he thought it might be that they're picking up residual energy. But when he saw the video, he was confused and said that they shouldn't be on for so long. Even weirder, I now keep waking up in the night to a totally different set of fairy lights in my room being turned on, despite them being off when I fall asleep. Starting to wonder what's happening. But the fact I can't brush it off as me just imagining it is definitely not helping. Story 4. I had a dream my dog had gone to a distant corner of our heavily wooded backyard and dug a hole to get out, which was odd because he wasn't a digger. He was stuck on the other side of the chain link fence because the hole was at a steep angle and he couldn't squeeze back through. I lifted the fence up enough for him to get back through. The next day I got home and the yard was eerily quiet. He'd usually run up to greet me. I thought of the dream and walked straight to the corner where I found him waiting on the other side of the fence and let him in. Story 5. I saw my deceased ex-husband in my kitchen. I was watching TV in my living room in the middle of the day and kept hearing this sound like someone was jiggling their change around. And it was loud, as if it were in the room with me. I paused my TV, yet the sound persisted. So I start to look around the room, and when I got to the kitchen, I saw him standing there. He was looking around, as if taking stock of my apartment. Oh, and he was jiggling change in one hand, while flipping a quarter in between his fingers with the other hand, something he did a lot when he was alive. He turned his head and saw me frozen, staring at him. The expression on his face was new I would never forget. His eyes got huge, and he kind of tilted his head forward with the expression like, "You can see me." I don't know how long we stared at each for, but I turned away when I started to hear my cat ripping up the fudge carpet again in the other room. When I turned back to my ex, he was gone. It's worth noting that he had only been dead for a couple months too. Some Romanian women I worked with told me that the dead stick around for 3 months before crossing over. I don't know about all that, but I know without a shadow of a doubt what I saw that day. Story 6. When I was between the ages of 4-6, I used to see a little blonde boy through this mirrored armoire in my parents' bedroom. The armoire was big and wooden, but had mirrored accents and mirrors running all the way around the base. If I laid on the carpet in front of it and looked into the mirrors on the bottom, sometimes I'd see a little blonde boy in a red sweater in the corner of the room, far away and a little distorted but still very clear. He would sit with his back to me, looking out the windows to the backyard. I don't remember ever seeing his face. I don't think I saw him many times, but I do remember his image very clearly. In my little kid mind, I thought I invented this super neat mirror trick by myself, so I tried to get my parents to see it too. They always refused, and my mom especially would get super mad at me for asking. I stopped seeing the boy when I stopped playing in their bedroom as much and knew mirrors shouldn't work like that. When I got older, I chalked it up to my overactive kid brain. Didn't think much of it TBH. Years and years later, when I was an adult and long after my parents had sold that house, my mom asked me about the armoire out of the blue, then told me that she used to see the little boy too. Not in the mirrors, but sometimes just out the corners of her eyes, like she'd be cooking and catch a glimpse of blonde hair pass by her hips at a kid's height, and occasionally in dreams. It didn't happen too often, but just enough to deeply freak them out. So when I mentioned seeing the same little boy, my mom was just terrified herself. There were other strange stuff in that house, but this was 100 the most vivid I remember. Answer: No, bro. I used to have a childhood imaginary friend when I was 2 who was a blonde boy, about 6 years old maybe. He used to play with me at my house and at daycare, but he would always bully me and hit me, and I complained about him pulling down my pants a lot. At first, my parents thought he was another boy at daycare and were pissed until the administrator explained. My parents chalked it up to me being an only child at the time, until my mother saw him run down the hallway when she was home alone. After my sister was born and I stopped playing with him, my mother had an eerie experience where she was woken up by the voice of a young boy next to her bed saying "Mommy" repeatedly. To be honest, I still see him every now and again. He hasn't aged. And it's always out of the corner of my eye, like he's playing hide and seek. I just tell him I'm not playing games. Go away. Story 7. When I was 16, an uncle, Dad's brother, passed unexpectedly. Weeks later, I had a dream about him and he told me to quit smoking cigarettes. It was way more involved, but it's been 20 years so I don't remember the rest. A month or so later, I mentioned the dream to my parents and my dad started crying, got up, and walked away. Apparently he'd dreamed of talking to his brother too, and he'd told my dad that he, uncle, needed to talk to me. X200B, edit. All the stories are beautiful. I'm so glad so many of us have been visited by loved ones after they passed, and thank you all for your advice encouragement on quitting. Love to each and every one of you. Answer: You just reminded me of something that I think kind of makes me uncomfortable. My father passed away unexpectedly about 2.5 years ago. I had a dream a couple months after he died that he called me. which kind of transitioned to me opening my front door and seeing him on my porch. We chatted for a bit, and at one point I pointed out that he wasn't alive anymore and asked him if he was okay. I remember him looking almost regretful and saying he wasn't. I started getting upset and told him he was always a good man, and he just said something to the effect of, "I could have been better." That's the last I recall of it. Definitely a bittersweet dream, because while it was good revisiting him in my mind in such a way, the last part was distressing. I actually prefer to believe the whole thing was purely the work of my subconscious. Story 8. I worked for an online retailer warehouse for a few months. There were 2 depressing windows that obviously were the bare minimum required for zoning that I probably walked by 1,000 times a day. Outside, you'd see a concrete retaining wall and some trucks. Obviously, after a while, I'd barely see out of my periphery, wall trucks, wall. Until one day I saw trucks, and then in the second window, pigs. It was only a second, but I definitely saw a bunch of massive pigs in fenced-in areas with a rolling hills beyond. Of course, when I look back, no pigs. For the next few weeks, I stared out the windows when I went past, always seeing nothing but that wall. It was only when I got lazy and stopped paying attention that it happened again. Pigs, hill, then look back and gone. Apparently, the land used to be a farm. Never found out if it was a pig farm. I like to think it's a flash of the past and not the ghosts of bacon. Story 9. In 2018, my grandpa was in the hospital due to being in a very bad diabetic state. No one wanted to say it, but he was close to the end of his life. My sister and a few cousins flew out to see him, and he was getting worse. I wanted to go, but I couldn't due to money, and it was eliminate me because him and I were extremely close. He ends up passing away a couple weeks later, and when my grandma called, she said he kept asking for me and my mom before he passed. And that crushed me. I wanted to say my finally goodbyes. I loved that man so much. Then one night I had an extremely vivid dream that I was at the beautiful ranch in Mexico, and I walked through the gates and saw this long house with many cars outside. I went in and opened the door, and I was greeted by my aunt. I have her a hug and turned to look who was all there. And sitting right in the corner was my grandpa smiling. He stood up, and I ran to him and have him the biggest hug. I woke up right after and cried tears of joy, sadness. It felt so real. Story 10. I used to do pest control. Went to a customer's business for the first time. As I walked in the office, I noticed some pictures that were supposed to be hanging on the wall were on the ground, and then saw some papers which looked like they had been thrown and scattered off a desk. I picked everything up so I could apply treatment to the floorboards and surrounding rooms. I then went to treat the only restroom in the office. I simply knocked on the door as a courtesy, as I always do. Before entering any restroom, there was no reply, for nobody was in there, so I went and applied treatment to the restroom, and I closed the door behind me. As I walked away from the door, I know I heard somebody grab the door handle, twist it open, and open the door. I turned around and looked to see nobody behind me but a door swinging open. The hair on my neck instantly stood up, and I put 2 and 2 together. I grabbed my chute and ran downstairs. The receptionist saw me and started laughing. She asked me if I had met their little friend upstairs. Story 11. 4 years ago, my fiancé died. He and his parents were American, but we were living in another country, so in less than a week, we had to clean the house. We took with us some things in the plane, but everything else was shipped. When I get to the US, I realized I can't find some earrings he gave to me in our first anniversary. I called my mom back home to check if I had left them somewhere, but had no luck. I was absolutely devastated. Few months go by, and one of his aunts had a dream with him, and apparently he had said, "Tell Finger Hut 89 I have them." So the aunt had no idea what was this about, but she told me. And at the time, I didn't really get it. Few more months, and we finally received the cargo with all our stuff. I start unpacking and found this little box where he used to put things like coins, keys, and my earrings. I miss him so much. I used to leave my earrings everywhere, and he was always telling me, "Can you please put them in one place? You are going to lose them." Story 12. My husband and I were traveling through New South Wales, Australia, and stayed at a lovely motel. In the morning, we went down to breakfast, and most of the other people had already left, so we were almost alone. Suddenly, a glass flew across an empty table and landed on the floor. I was facing that direction and fully saw it as if it was pushed across the table. I looked behind me at the only other couple, and they were wide-eyed and confused. Apparently, the motel has a permanent resident that likes attention. Story 13. My best friend's dad, who was a second father to me, came to me in a dream and told me to tell my best friend that he loved her and that he was sorry. I woke up to my cell phone ringing to find it was my best friend, absolutely hysterical, telling me that he finally passed away from sclerosis. I sobbed all day. He was a tipsy our whole lives, but it still hurt. Answer: wow, this is hard. I know it is, because it's happened to me too. My grandpa came to tell he loves me and asked me to be strong at his funeral because my dad will be completely broken. I never told Dad because he just won't accept a possibility of anything beyond the ordinary Jane Dane life. More recently, husband's aunt visited me in a vivid dream, giving me instructions on how to crochet a toy for her future grandkid. When I woke up, it was Emil calling that Auntie had passed that night. I will be making that toy now. The baby is due this month. Story 14. I've posted about this before, but when I was about 9 years old, 1995, in the middle of a bright summer day, I went to the refrigerator to get a popsicle. Suddenly, a roughly teenage-looking guy with long brown hair, wearing a beige turtleneck and red plaid bell-bottoms, turned around the corner into the hallway to my left, then vanished from toe to head as I looked at him. Told no one about it for years, until after my mother mentioned meeting the now-grown kids who lived in the house before us, who asked her if she'd seen the bell-bottom ghost. Story 15. My grandfather loved my grandmother a lot. He would constantly tell her she was beautiful and would always do embarrassing things to make her laugh. Unfortunately, she died a few months after being diagnosed with cancer. This affected him a lot, but as time went on, he came to terms with it. My grandfather lived on for another 18 years. In his final years, he developed really bad Alzheimer's that led him to forget that his wife had passed away and would often call for her or ask us where she went. We'd explain to him that she had passed away, but it always made him distressed and upset. So we decided to tell him she'll be back soon every time he asked where she was. A month or so before my grandfather passed away, I was at his house with my mother, and we were all sitting in the living room. My grandfather, who was seated on his chair, all of a sudden starts frantically asking us where my grandmother was. We calmly explained to him that she'll be back soon, and she was just out doing some chores. Unlike most times, he was being persistent on wanting to see her. We explained to him again that she'll be back soon, but he kept getting more persistent. He started to frantically call for her. He screamed her name as loud as he could over and over again, until out of nowhere every single door and window in the room flung open all at once. Now we could say that it was just wind, but all the doors and windows in the house had secure locks and would stay locked at all times, since my grandfather would wander off or forget to lock his doors. All the doors and windows burst open, and at that same second my grandfather, who was facing the front door, says, "What took you so long? I've been waiting for you," with a smile. My mother and I didn't see the person my grandfather talked to, but I'm sure that he saw his wife. Story 16. Not sure if this counts as supernatural, but here it goes. The summer after I graduated high school, I got a job delivering pizza to help save money for college. I had a lot of run-ins with some pretty weird characters, but nothing like what happened this one night. It was a Friday night. We deliver pizzas until 3 a.m. Fridays and Saturdays. It was 2:45 a.m., and we were preparing to close when our manager said we got a call for a delivery at place almost 20 kilometers away. Being the desperate for money teenager I was, I offered to do the delivery. This was before smartphones had GPS, so I used a Garmin. I plugged in the address and off I went. The Garmin took me deep into the backwoods of rural Texas. I finally arrived to my destination. The house looked like something in a horror movie. Big wooden 2-story house with no lights on. The first thing I noticed about the house was that the front door was wide open. I sat in my car for a few minutes, debating on turning back and claiming no one was home. Something just didn't feel right. I needed the tip money, so I sucked it up and approached the house. When I got to the open front door, I didn't enter. Instead, I knocked. No one answered. I knocked again. As loud as I could. No response. I finally got the courage to say something. Pizza delivery. Anyone home? There was a few seconds of silence until I heard a weird voice. Upstairs. I walked in the house and could barely make out my surroundings because it was so dark. I make it to the bottom of the stairs and look up into the dark abyss. Again, I said, pizza delivery. The voice spoke again. Come upstairs. I can't get out of bed. Something was very off about this voice. It didn't sound normal. The best I can describe it is if a dog somehow learned to talk but still had trouble pronouncing human. Words. The hair stood up on my neck. There was no fudge way I was going up there. The tip wasn't worth it. I placed the pizza at the bottom of the stairs and shouted, I'm leaving it here at the bottom of the stairs. Have a good night. As I turned away, the voice said, No, come upstairs. I can't get out of bed, I replied. I'm sorry, I'm not even allowed to enter someone's home on the job. You'll have to come get it. I heard some loud banging from upstairs with the voice shouting at full volume, Come upstairs. I can't come out of bed. The voice shouted this over and over again like it was a recording. On a loop. The banging got louder and louder as the voice got louder. I noped the fudge out of there at full speed. To this day, I have no idea what the fudge happened in that house. Edit. I was not expecting so many people to be interested in this story. I'll try to answer some common questions. They were supposed to pay by cash, so I guess they got the pie on the house. Fudge, no. I never went back. Not even during the day. A lot of people are saying old or crippled person. Then who the fudge left the front door wide open? No, I didn't try to turn on the light. It was already so late, I just wanted to drop off the pizza and go home. A lot of you are talking about skinwalkers. I had to Google it, and I must say, this story is a lot more creepier after reading about them. This was in Spring TX. Answer. I used to deliver pharmaceuticals to housebound and less than mobile people, and had 1 or 2 deliveries that started out this way. It's a lot less disconcerting when it's not a random person for a pizza luring you into a house, but a sweet old lady. You've been told you must enter and knock a certain way, or that the door will be opened by neighbors early in the day and shut by a certain time at night. One lady had been warned about for being creepy and bedridden was actually very sweet, knew my family, and I would help her outside of my work duties sometimes with yard stuff for way less than normal landscaping prices, usually just a sandwich. As scary truly as your story is, I can't help but picture one of my old folks just trying to get a pizza in their medicated or disabled best way. Story 17. I met a girl a long time ago, like close to 20 years ago. We hung out off and on, nothing significant really, just as friends, and told stories about our lives and other stupid shoot. After a while, she told me a story about a house she used to live in a neighboring city. She told me about how she'd experienced the same thing, the same haunting, every few nights. Her bedroom was upstairs, and the kitchen, dining room, a bathroom, and another bedroom were in the basement. Easiest way to access them was through the garage. That's how everyone came inside anyway. No one used the actual front door. Upstairs, anyway. In the middle of the night, she'd hear someone enter through the garage and go into the kitchen. They were basically attached. The faucet would turn on and a bowl or something would crash in the sink. The water would stop. The footsteps would continue through the dining room and to the staircase. It was a mini spiral staircase that led to the living room. Her bedroom was attached to that. Then the footsteps would stop halfway up. It was only about 10 steps before the top, but she said they'd always stop at the same point. When she told me this, I panicked. I asked her the address. It was the same house I'd lived in as a kid 4 years before she did, and I experienced the same thing. Only I'd never told a single person about it. Not my parents, my brothers, my friends, no one. Yet she described it perfectly, step by step, room by room. That house was always weird, even before my own experience, but never have I had a shared haunting moment like that. Answer: something similar happened to me kinda. When I was in high school, some friends and I went to an abandoned haunted orphanage in a neighboring town. It was a pretty popular thing to do in our area, just for a good scare. Anyway, as we were walking up, my friend and I are talking and both of us suddenly stop. I glanced up and saw a little girl sitting in the only barred window on the 3rd floor. My friend saw it too, but when we turned back to get everyone else's attention, she was gone. Pretty freaky. Years later, I'm in college at a small house party, and we start trading ghost sorties. A guy that I've never met before starts telling the story of the little girl he saw in the only barred window of the town orphanage. We then start trading details about her hair, clothing, etc. Even creepier is that he went there years after I did when he saw her,